I find that clip fascinating. I've watched it a ton of times, and I'm always intrigued by what's going on there. So by way of analysis, I'd like to move through three distinct phases. First off, I just want to summarize both Clinton and Bush's response. Then I want to talk to how Clinton's response differs from Bush, what Clinton is doing specifically. And then finally, I want to return to those three aspects of ethos: phronesis, arete, and eunoia. So let's begin by sort of moving through Bush's response to that question. So he starts off sort of very broadly, very generally in response to this question, which is not tremendously well phrased. In fact, the questioner tries to sort of clarify it a little bit. But Bush starts off very generally in response to that question, but then he gets interrupted. That didn't shake out well. And then he tries to get the question reframed. And I think we can debate whether or not that's a fair question that was asked. Nevertheless, it was asked, and it was a national forum, and this was a presidential debate. So those are the pieces that you've got to work with on the chessboard. And so once that question's out there, I think it needs to be responded to. And in essence, that question is a question about ethos. It's about expertise, but it's about empathy. That's really what that question was trying to get at, was, you should be able to feel my financial pain if you're going to make policies that affect my financial pain. That's kind of what that heart of the question was. But Bush tries to respond to that empathy issue, but the way in which he responds to it, he finally finds something he can use for this, right? You can sort of feel a back and forth between the questioner, gets a bit hostile, not overtly, not name-callingly, but you can hear some hostility in the interchange between President Bush and the questioner. But then he sort of finds something that he can use to respond to this issue of empathy. Unfortunately, that response is not personally felt, but I went to a church and I read about poor people. That probably isn't exactly what you are hoping for. How do you understand me? Well, I read about everyone who doesn't have money. So that probably, from an invention standpoint, wasn't the best example to use, but it all affects the ethos and how he talks to it. So he's trying to make that point about caring about people who experience debt, but it's not about him experiencing debt. And the whole thing feels hostile overall. Now, Bush really got the short end of the stick on that one. I mean, he had to go first in response to that question. He was the incumbent. He was the sitting president. And he was known as being wealthy before he entered office. Nevertheless, it wasn't a good answer for him. Okay? But I think you can say, is it something that what was being pushed was, can you understand my financial pain if you have not experienced financial pain? The dude's president, right? He's not sitting around the Oval Office at his desk trying to figure out how they're going to squeeze more money into the Funyuns budget that week. Dude's president, and he was wealthy beforehand. So that's not how it has to be responded to, is saying, I've been poor. So he has a real challenge in front of him. Okay? Nevertheless, that response does not grant him much ethos in that moment for that questioner or on that issue. Now, flip to Clinton. Okay, certainly he's got more time. He can plot his strategy here. And he starts off by once again going back to that questioner, saying, tell me your narrative. Tell me how you experience this. And then he responds by saying, here's how I have felt it. Right? It's a question about empathy. He makes the answer about emotion and empathy. So there's a one-to-one relationship there. So he says, here's how I felt it. Well, I've been the governor of a small state. Okay, that sounds good. If you think about it, though, it's like, oh, yes, you do understand my inability to pay off my car because you've been a governor of a small state. Sure, you're no New York. You get made fun of on the playground. No, but nevertheless, he says, I've been governor of a small state. So here's what I have seen. I have known people who have lost their jobs. I've known people who have had to close their factories. I've known people just like you. I've talked to people just like you. So there's a lot of personal stuff in there, a lot of personal narratives, and bringing it down to the individual. So he makes it about the personal. Okay? He makes it about empathy. He's sort of reaffirming the questioner's, sense of pain or sense of loss, and he's talking about his personal interaction with the debt, with the financial issues at stake. But that's not all he does, right? So he makes that point, and then he pivots, and he starts talking about policy. Then he starts rattling off facts and statistics, lack of investment, low wages, no private sector job growth, so on and so forth. So we've got both components going on in his answer, maybe that weren't going on in Bush's answer. And then he finishes with a real nice capper. So he's sort of planned that time very well. He ends by capping off the point by saying what he would do. I'm going to invest in jobs and education, healthcare, so on and so forth. So he's got a nice sort of positive end to that. He talks about what he will do at the end of that point. Okay, so those are sort of a flow, a side-by-side flow of their response to that. So what's really different about Clinton's response? Well, first off, there's a lot different in terms of invention. He's talking about personal narrative. He's acknowledging the questioner, okay? So the content of his response is just flat out different. The style is certainly one that cultivates a different ethos. He's highlighting the commonality, the common experiences between himself and that questioner, okay? So you have known people who have lost their jobs. I've known people who have lost their jobs. You felt some real struggle with this. I too have had to struggle with this. So he's really highlighting commonality there. That's not by accident, right? Those are specific vocabulary choices that are highlighting that commonality. And then in terms of delivery, right, he closes that physical space, right? There's much more what we'd call immediacy there. He's right in front of that questioner talking to them. Certainly his tone, just the very tone of his voice is softer than we heard in Bush. Part of that's a matter of accent, right? But some of it is also affecting how his ethos is experienced in that moment, okay? So then finally, how does this map on top of ethos? First off, phronesis. Does he come across as knowledgeable? Does Clinton come across as knowledgeable in that instance? Most certainly, right? Not in the first half, but when he shifts to his discussion of policy, he's rattling off statistics and figures, okay? Those are right there at the front of his brain, okay? You have a strong sense that he understands those issues. You might disagree with him on his interpretation, but he knows his facts and figures. Second, arete. Is he dynamic? Yeah, I think so. And this is when he was running for president. So this is years before all the Saturday Night Live sketches about Clinton come out, and I feel your pain, and all those sort of caricatures. But is he dynamic in that moment for that audience? I would say yes. He's very focused, but he appears calm, right? There's not any of that hostility that Bush had in his answer. Also, it's a question that is not friendly towards the incumbent, so he benefits from that. Clinton benefits from that. But he's focused, but he appears calm. He's clearly invested in the subject matter, but he's empathetic, right? He's trying to demonstrate that he at least understands the emotional hardship that comes with financial troubles. And is there a question of goodwill? Is goodwill on display? Eunoia. Yeah, well, certainly he's, again, the caricature of Clinton is, I feel your pain. But here he's performing that. He's demonstrating his empathy of someone else's pain. But not only that in terms of goodwill, he also ends the point by talking about its remedy, what he would do as president to make sure others don't feel that exact same type of emotional hardship. So this is an opportunity to think about ethos, think about credibility in a very specific context and look at contrasting versions of ethos in response to the same question. So in exploring this, I don't care if you like either one of these candidates or not, okay? That's not the issue here. But what I do think you want to be doing is looking at this clip as an opportunity to understand ethos. It can be very instructive in that regard. So looking at it and trying to crack it open, see the moving parts there, and see how ethos is being performed. And then determine which one you like better and which one you can learn from more so that you can improve your own ethos. So this is an opportunity, this video was trying to understand ethos in sort of its broadest terms, overall credibility. But we're talking about this within the context of an informative speech. So what we're going to do in the next video lecture is start talking about that. Now that we've talked about ethos in general, how can we talk about informative ethos?